Hey everybody, it is the Angry Honey Badger here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Ninja 5 Absolute Goliath air cooler by Scythe. Now, this thing is quite large, and there are other large air coolers on the market, but how well do those large air coolers hold up on a pretty hot processor compared to all-in-one liquid cooling? Well, today we're going to go ahead and put those two to the challenge and see which one can come out on top. Alright, let's take a peek at the Scythe Ninja 5 Quiet Cooler. Now actually, when they see the word quiet, I believe them. Mostly because the fans that are included are pretty low RPM fans, so this thing stays pretty quiet overall when you are actually under fairly taxing loads, which is a pretty good thing in my opinion, so that's kind of nice. One thing I will say is I actually teamed it up with slightly different fans that they sent me, the Kaze Flex 120 RGB fans, very similar, but they do ramp up a little bit more in terms of speed, and of course they have some pretty awesome RGB lighting that looks pretty solid, to be honest. I like them. I use these fans for my testing on both coolers, and they perform quite well, and pretty happy with them. And they, like I said, they look good, and they're RGB. They plug straight into my board, so I can control them with some Aura Sync software, and pretty happy about that. So we use those fans, but overall, let's look at the rest of the cooler. Now, we're just going to glance at it over on Newegg's website. It's a beast. You can tell it's huge. I mean, I got pictures of it inside my machine right now. It is quite large, but that being said, overall, now when they show it here on this motherboard, which I like this shot, this is a good shot on a ATX motherboard, obviously you'd be mounting a fan on the front and you'd be mounting a fan on the back, so it's going to fill up space pretty well. Should clear your top of your AIO, back on the back of this cover that's on most boards, and then it actually will clear with a bit of finesse, luckily. One other thing I like to see, it has fairly high clearance for tall memory. I'm using quite tall memory in my build right now. I'm using the Corsair Vengeance RGB memory, and because it's got that RGB in it, they're very high up there. And it does clear them completely. That was one compatibility issue I was afraid of when I was looking at this. But no, it does clear a really high memory. So you have G-Skill Trident Z. It'll clear that because I know that's shorter than the RGB Vengeance memory. So you will have good clearance options. One thing I definitely like to see. Now, you may have to, but luckily, you may have to mount the fan slightly up. Luckily, the fan mounts in this ridge, so if your fan's gonna hit this, if your fan was to come down here all the way, your fan will be slightly higher up. That's how it is on my build, not because of the memory per se, but actually because of the 24-pin cable that is on mine that wants to go up like this, mostly because I'm running on an ITX board, so things are even more compact, and I'm able to have pretty good clearance in an ITX chassis. So if you're looking to mount this in a smaller build, or form factor, it's actually capable of that too. So overall, so far, we're checking some pretty good boxes in terms of compatibility. Now, this is, of course, going to be working on your Intel sockets and your AMD sockets, because that's what we're testing it on specifically is AMD. We're on the AM4 socket with Ryzen 3000. But Intel, you know, your 1150X and your 2011s, your 2066s, pretty popular stuff over there. And then, of course, current gen AM4 for AMD and AM3. Plus, if you're using it on older AMD stuff, but I would just tell you to get a new AMD processor at this point because AM4 is definitely a good place to be right now. Dimensions of it, though, 130 millimeters, just the cooler itself with 6 heat pipes, or is it 8? I can't remember. It's a ridiculous amount of heat pipes. It is 6 heat pipes. That's what they're calling. But it looks like more than that. It's a ton. It's just a crazy amount. And this thing is, of course, very large. The fans that come with it ramp between 200 and 800 RPM. Like I said, pretty low for stock fans. It keeps things nice and quiet, and there's so much cooling area on this heatsink for this whole just Ninja cooler. It stays cool overall if you're just playing it with really, I don't know, just playing it normal. I'm doing synthetic loads in our testing that we'll get to in a second, and it's handling them fairly well, in my opinion. So, Ninja 5, you can check it out on Newegg. It looks like it's $59.49, pretty cheap in comparison. And then on Amazon, $59.99. So, yeah, it's a pretty good deal, too, in terms of a really big, beefy cooler. And it's definitely got beef in its name. I mean, it doesn't actually have it in its name, but you know what I'm saying. It's quite large and in charge. We'll see how it tests against our all-in-one. So to kick things off for our testing, just wanted to see what the computer wanted to do at idle. Now, I will say you're going to say these idle temperatures are a little bit high, and they are a little high compared to other processors, but this is a Ryzen 3rd Gen 3800X, and I am letting Ryzen Master software on performance settings just kind of take things and do what they want. So at PC idle temperatures, you can see, idles jump around a little bit, that we are a little bit cooler on the Ninja 5 cooler compared to the 240mm AIO. And this is because we are boosting to 4.35 gigahertz constantly at idle, which of course is unnecessary, I agree. But that's because, like I said, the Ryzen Master software likes to throw as much voltage at this processor pretty much all the time. So if you want to manually control that, you can definitely get things down a little bit. I just let it do its own thing because I want to see what happens if you pretty much plug and play everything in there. No adjusting your fan curves, no screwing with any of that at the moment. We just want to see what everything would happen at idle temperatures and what our temperatures would sit at, because it wants to boost to, like I was saying, a 4.3 gigahertz boost. So temperatures on the Ninja 45 to 52 and on the 240 AIO 49 to 55. And that was at an ambient temperature of 24.5 degrees Celsius. House temp. That's about 76 degrees Fahrenheit for an ambient temperature. And then moving things into what kind of we want to see as our main test, A to 64. We have a max temperature of very similar along both of them, a little bit lower on the Ninja 5. We have 87.13 and we had 87.5 on the 240mm AIO. Boost speed, it boosted the same, but I will say the Ninja kept trying to boost further above, which then would slowly bring that max temperature up to where it became. Overall, it was a lower average temperature of about 85 degrees, while the 240 pretty much just sat and was soaked and saturated at 87.5 degrees. But that being said, this is at the CPU and Ryzen Master pushing 1.4137 or something like that volts through the processor. So it wanted to push a lot of voltage through this thing, which is definitely going to ramp up the heat, which is, pretty good. We want to saturate this with as much heat as possible to see where the temperature is going to go, how much it's going to boost, if it's going to have to throttle back at all. But overall, it did not need to, and it actually, you could say, surpassed the 240mm cooler, not only in temperature by just a very, very, very small margin, but it kept trying to then continue to boost even higher with more voltage and an even higher clock speed. So there you go, there's your stress tests on your 240 versus your absolutely kind of beastly Ninja 5. It seems to kind of handle its own and do a very good job at displacing that heat and wanting to obviously continue boosting, so plenty of surface area and cooling capacity for it. Now, like I said, there's some compatibility things about this cooler that I do like. It does actually fit into my ITX build on my ITX motherboard over some very tall memory. Really happy about that. Now, there's a few things that obviously are very close to compatibility constraints. I can't fit the back fan on the cooler directly, but I do have it on the back of the case, and there's about a paper slice thin of clearance between the two, so it's basically like it is mounted to the back of the fan, or back of the heatsink, and then goes out the rear of the case. So it does clear it, and it does clear the fan on the top. So this thing is large, it's bulky, but it fits. So I'm actually pretty impressed with some of the constraints I thought it may have. Now, pros and cons, just going over a few other things, obviously it's a lot cheaper than an AIO. Depending on, kind of your aesthetics, I mean, I like that it actually fills up that part of the chassis a little bit more with some RGB fans. I think it looks decent for, a heat sink compared to just a little pump and a little AIO, what you'd normally see. So overall, I think it's got good aesthetics. If that's something, that comes down to the way you feel about that, you may feel differently, but for what I was looking for, or what I was expecting, I think it actually looks pretty good in my build. We all care about some aesthetics in our builds nowadays with RGB and other components, so I wanted to see how that would work. One thing that's kind of a trade-off with that at the same time, though, is it's great that it will clear your RGB memory, but it will kind of then block your RGB memory. So if you don't have RGB memory, great, and you want a big cooler, this could definitely do the trick, and you don't have to worry about blocking off something that you may have paid to kind of see, but you won't really see it quite as much because it is so big and it will cover them up just a little bit depending on the motherboard that you do have. So you can kind of look at that as a con. Now, once again, upkeep of one of these compared to an AIO, AIOs shouldn't be too difficult, but eventually they will maybe start to slowly run into issues. This really shouldn't. If you ever need to replace the fans, you replace the fan, the heat sink should be fine. Replace your compound on it, whenever you need to, and things should be fine. It should, in theory, last forever. It's a heat sink. Nothing really goes wrong. It just needs to dissipate heat. So it should also see the test of time fairly well. But overall, I'm pretty impressed with it. As I've been gaming on it too, I've noticed it stay a little bit quieter than my AIO previously, because it just naturally does. I don't have solid concrete numbers, but I can just tell you how I've been seeing things on my gaming performance. And also, it does, in fact, with the way Ryzen likes to work in the Ryzen Master software, because it thinks it has a little bit more headroom in some of those situations, it is trying to boost it a little bit more and just trying to throw more voltage at it. Now, it has in a few times thrown so much voltage at it that when I'm not using, or when I'm not playing games, I like to turn my voltage down manually, because no one needs 1.4 something crazy amounts of volts. Turn that crap down. Keep your temps cooler in your whole system when you're just browsing the web. So I've been doing that because I don't know why, my chip just loves to boost to high health. So, but it's capable of it, and it definitely gets me performance when it does, but a little unnecessary. So that's just a little more chip action. But because that cooler definitely sees the headroom there available, it tries to go for it on the chip. So kind of impressed with that too. Very interesting. And of course, you know, we have the concept of, you know, if you want your system to cool off quicker after a certain amount of workloads, obviously, you know, a heatsink just cools down right away when the fans blow air right off of it and cool it down. You know, an AIO and a loop need time to cool down. That hot water inside of the loop has to go through the radiator multiple times to bring all the temps down. Everything gets nice and saturated that way. So this cools down a little bit quicker too, if that's something you're worried about. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with the cooler. It gets a recommendation from me if you're looking for a big air cooler. If that's not your style and you want to stick with an AIO, there's obviously plenty of good ones on the market too. But this is pretty good for bang for its buck, and it's beefy too. You want to keep a CPU with a pretty high TDP cool. It's got the headroom to do it. It's pretty good. So definitely a thumbs up from me. If you want to check it out, I'll leave you a link down below in the description, and you can do that. Don't forget to like this video if you found it helpful. Subscribe for future video content. Check out the Discord if you're bored, and I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it happens to do that, so that's kind of weird and amazing. But all things aside, thanks for checking out the video, and I'll see all of you in the next one. The Ninja 5 cooler by Scythe, and compare it to your mom, because they're comparable. She's cool, it's cool. Checks out.